I was 2 years old when I was dedicated to the cause of Lucifer, I was at that point a seventh-generation witch.
I was laying there, practically naked, and I had her hold me as if I was naked. I couldn't talk. I couldn't open my eyes. I believe my eyes were rolled up back in my head.
There was evidence of human sacrifice on this site. One of my first questions I asked the guy, is there evidence of human sacrifice? Now looks around there, yes. We found the man with his fingers like, who was a Richard Zachary. Disgusting smell. And at that point, just basically said, do you know what they did to us? And that's when I fled that home. But no, they would touch me. They would take pictures of my head if they wanted to communicate with me. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. Implants are real, okay? You know, we've got them on X-ray, we've got them on CAT scan, we've got them on the Gauss meter, which measures magnetic field, 7.5. We've got them on an ultrasound machine. It's right there. It's hard, physical evidence, not delusionary.
That it is hardcore physical evidence, not delusionary.
Indeed.
Look, you'd say that about the whole show. All right, guys, welcome back to Conspirinormal. It's only been like a little less than a week that we were here last, and we had Rocky Suchi on last time. That whole thing got real deep and real political real quick.
Yeah. Yep. It way over my head.
Oh, come on. Well, we do not have Luke here tonight. We are Luke less because he's home playing with his new computer, so he says. And who knows? I guess he was too frightened to get out here in the snow. But
that should
I
mean some
braved it
new
to come out here.
Which means new bumper music then.
Yeah, we might get some new bumper music, maybe new theme song with some new guest voices. That would be pretty awesome. Well, it's snowing outside here in Nashville, and I'm sure that people are wrecking all over the place. Was it horrible for you to get home today, Rob?
No, I thought it was going to take forever, but it really wasn't that bad.
Yeah, it's not. It's just like a little bit of like snow outside today. Like we had our massive 3-foot snowstorm the other day, so a couple of weeks ago. But tonight we have on Walter Bosley, and he's come back for his third time on Conspirinormal. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about his new book, Origin, the 19th century origin of the Breakaway civilization. And this is a topic that I've kind of come interested in lately. I want to kind of talk about it more in the outro, but until recently, I've kind of not taken that whole idea serious about a whole breakaway civilization or a secret space program. But now I'm kind of finding some researchers that have been talking about it, and it seems like there might be something to it, although I don't know if there's colonies on Mars or anything like that, but it could be a little more low level. What do you think, Rob?
I'm completely unfamiliar with the topic. What did you mean by breakaway civilizations?
Well, breakaway civilizations would be this idea that you have a group of people that either finds or develops a certain technology that would allow them to get off the planet or be on the planet, but maybe be somewhere else. And they really don't want to interact with or interfere with the mainstream civilization, or as we think of it. So that's the whole idea, this idea of the secret space program. Like we were talking with Captain K, and that I don't really know what to think about that.
I don't see any evidence that suggests that we've had the technology up until now.
Right.
I could entertain the thought that there's, organizations out there that are plotting this for the future, for sure.
Yeah.
Leave the masses behind and let's start our little utopia because we're the rich elite kind of thing elsewhere. But
sure.
Then again, all the resources are here, so they'd probably ship us off somewhere else and stay here.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things in UFO lore, there's this idea, there's this theory that some of the spacecraft that you might be seeing, or some of the UFOs that people are seeing, are actually things that are made by humans. And there's this idea that you have a breakaway civilization that is flying these things around and just kind of ignoring the rest of us.
That's interesting.
So that's kind of the idea. That's kind of the idea there. And so like Richard Dolan, I believe, be a great person to get on the show if he's listening. He kind of, I think he kind of coined the term, maybe him and Joseph Farrell, who are guests tonight, is good friends with. I think both of them kind of coined this term, breakaway civilization. In other words, that this civilization would be out there and they would be flying these craft, and they're not really worried about what's going on with us necessarily. So there's more of it's just, I think it's a way of explaining it other than just it's all extraterrestrials or it's all aliens.
Right. This is great. I've never heard of this.
Yeah.
I'm really excited now.
Yeah. And there's also, we're going to talk to Walter about the airship mystery, which, generally is 1897 airship mystery is generally seen as like the beginning of UFOs, of this, like a kind of a precursor to flying saucers or unidentified objects in the sky. And apparently these were these massive airships that were seen in 1896, 1897 by several people in the western states of the United States. And apparently one crashed in, somewhere outside of Dallas in like 1897. And there was an occupant that was badly burned. And apparently he was buried there. And so you have a school of thought that thinks, okay, well, that was just, those were aliens. And then people just kind of interpreted it later on interpreted their craft as flying saucers or cigar shaped objects, this idea. But there's also another school of thought that says that this was actually human invention. It's just that we didn't know about it because it was a secret program that was going on. And then eventually these people broke off and formed their own kind of group, their own civilization, if you want to say that. And then there's a lot of things that go on with it, with the Nazis and, whether the Nazi apparatus survived World War II and whether they had this technology, their own technology as well. So that's another element of it there. So I think it's just another, like I said, it's another way to explain it other than that it's extraterrestrial.
Right.
And for me, as somebody that believes that a lot of the alien abduction and the contact experience that is more of an internal thing than it is external, then I would maybe look at the breakaway civilization and say, okay, there might be something to that because maybe this is just two separate phenomenon. You're seeing maybe two separate phenomena that might feed off of each other, but people are seeing our actual craft, physical craft,
right.
But they're either this breakaway civilization or our own civilization's technology, secret technology. And then you have the alien contact experience, which might be separate from that.
Right. And that's about kind of parallel with what I believe too, is that not that it's, some breakaway civilization, since I've never even come across that theory. But I do think that it's most likely, at least 90% of it military, because if you look at the pattern of UFO sightings and how they were described, they tend to predate, crafts that were then
available,
explained away, you know, 10 or 15 years later, like, oh yeah, we had these back then. And that's, you know, a lot like what people were seeing. And
right.
The alien abduction side of it, I can't explain. I have no.
Yeah. I think we've explored that a lot on the show. Like I said, I think a lot of it is more internal than it is external.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's more internal to us, even though there are physical aspects to the phenomenon. So to me, there's also the possibility that you might have a mind control program that's going on as well. And that's part of the alien abduction mythos or the lore. But I had something that I wanted to play because we were talking to Soraya Askath a couple shows ago, and we were talking about the Satanist stuff. and we were talking about how Satanists have been causing all kinds of problems. And I'm gonna set this up real quick while you pull it up here, the audio clip. But these in Phoenix, apparently Phoenix, Arizona. Apparently you can go before every city council meeting, and they will have a prayer, right? And a Satanist group from Tucson called the Satanic Templars or something like that, were allowed to come in. They were going to be allowed to come in and give an invocation at the beginning of this, of the city council meeting. Well, this got pulled down apparently by city council. So if you want to play that for us, Rob.
A controversial vote tonight in Phoenix. The city council will not allow a satanic prayer at an upcoming meeting. Instead, there will be a moment of silent prayer. Joe Dana from our sister station in Phoenix was there for tonight's heated debate. It's a story that's new at 10.
Look, every city council member here tonight expressed their disagreement with Satanism, but they say they had a dilemma. Rewrite prayer practices to prevent a Satanist from praying here on the 17th, while also making the city vulnerable to a lawsuit, or take away public prayers altogether and avoid lawsuits. Preventing a Satanist's prayer, a reason to celebrate for some members of mainstream religions,
is a victory on our city.
But for others, the vote a defeat.
That's what this whole thing is about, really, political correctness. And you know what? Trying to take God out of everything.
It was an all-or-nothing approach. In the end, the council voting for nothing, led by Mayor Greg Stanton.
Not even 2 years ago, the justices on the Supreme Court, including the conservative justices Roberts and Alito, stated clearly what the Constitution demands of cities like ours, that when it comes to prayer, we can't discriminate against minority or unpopular faith.
Beginning tomorrow, no prayers will be allowed to open city council meetings. Instead, moments of silent prayer only. Council members relying largely on advice from the city's attorney. Councilman Sal DiCiccio, the most vocal opponent of the measure.
Because I want to give you hope. I want you to walk out of here knowing that this is not going to stop tonight if we lose this vote.
But several council members had harsh words towards DiCiccio, who suggested that supporting a moment of silence was to advocate for Satanists.
And when my colleagues attack us and my faith, that's very personal.
That was Joe Dana reporting. The councilwoman who sponsored the moment of silent prayer rule said she didn't want the city paying out $500,000 in legal fees and lawsuits when there are more important issues to deal with.
I need a little bell there whenever stuff like that comes up.
Little cash register noise.
It's like the No Agenda podcast. They just give you a little ding, ding. Yeah. So basically, instead of having the Satanists come in and give their invocation, the city council, after much debate, I must add, ruled
much legal advice.
Yeah. Much debate. Like, you can actually go online, you can go on YouTube and you can watch all 3 hours of this, like, deliberations. And I watched a little bit of it today, and a lot of it was just, what you heard at the very end there. I mean, just like, we can't let God be trampled by the Satanists and all this kind of stuff. And so anyway, rather than letting the Satanists give their invocation, they just said, well, no, we're just not going to have prayers at all. So we're just going to have like a moment of silence so it makes me think that what was this? Was that what the Satanists were trying to do? Was that they were trying to prove?
I think so. And well, personally, that's what I got out of the whole story was that, all right, I have no problem with Christianity or Christians or anyone or any beliefs, provided that, you're not a destructive individual and you're, contributing to progress in our society and the human race.
Sure.
But if Christians aren't going to stand up for the rights and the things that our country was founded on, and the Satanists are, I have no choice but to side with the Satanists. Like, it's, I don't know.
I mean, instead of letting them come in and give, and I actually saw an interview with these Satanists, instead of letting them come in and give like maybe it's like, I don't know, a minute, 2 minutes, instead of like actually letting them come in and give this invocation, they just said, no more. We're not going to do any prayers at all. So this was a way to just, it was CYA, cover your ass. We're not going to do it, and we won't let anybody pray then.
Well, that's fine. Either everyone should be allowed to or no one should be allowed to. There shouldn't be a gray area. Like, there should not be in any kind of government meeting, there should not be this religion is allowed to express its beliefs and none others are.
Be favored over the other.
Even if they happen to be Satanists.
Yeah. So it was pretty obvious though where it came from. I mean, just the idea to just kind of shut them down.
Well, and that's where everything the Satanists do comes from.
Yeah.
It really is. And it's I think it's an important part of balance.
We had this, we had the whole thing. We talked about this with Soraya, where they were the statues. They wanted to put the statues up in Oklahoma, and they wanted to have, they've done all kinds of things like the coloring book that they wanted to have in schools, and just all this kind of silliness. And it's almost to me, these Satanists, and we're talking about these LaVeyan Satanists, right? People that are basically atheists, but they use Satanism as Satan as a symbol of man's rationality or the power of man or whatever it is that they say. They're just kind of like internet trolls, really.
Yeah. Well, even their names, calling themselves Satanists, that's a marketing ploy.
Yeah.
They don't worship Satan. They're gonna constantly have attention because they're called Satanists.
Right, exactly.
And yeah, they are like, they are out there for some good purposes. There really does need to be a checks and balances system. There does need to be, things need to be kept kind of, some things need to have an eye on them and not let them grow out of control. And
well, what do you think would have happened if they had let them do this invocation? I mean, do you think that it probably then you would get this accusation from the other side that would say that the Phoenix City Council is supporting the Satanists, even though we've let the Christian groups come in and pray all these other city council meetings, and we're going to let the Satanists come in just one city council meeting and pray. It is in a way showing favoritism to a certain group.
Right. Yeah. They put them in a tight spot. Sure.
Yep. For sure. Yeah. I mean, the whole separation of church and state, I mean, it's a dicey issue. It really is.
Yeah, but I don't think it should be. I mean, it's very important, and I'm okay with anyone believing what they believe, but there's a very good reason that we founded this country with the separation of church and state and the freedom of religion.
Right. Well,
until it gets to this kid can't silently pray in school kind of crap like that, I don't agree with, but.
Right.
Because that's a personal thing. And if it's a personal thing, then that's totally great.
Yeah, and it's not up to the Phoenix City Council as a government entity to endorse any particular religion.
Right.
And so, have a moment of silence. I mean, that's a nice little neutral way of doing it. But when you have prayers, you essentially are endorsing a religion because it gets hard because everybody in the group is a Christian. Everybody that's there might be Christian. 80%, let's say. That's the number. And so, everybody's going to get together in that group and they're going to want to pray in that group, but they forget that they are a government entity.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? What I'm saying there? Yeah.
And I do, but that gets a little tricky. But why can't you say your prayer on the drive there? Or.
Yeah, or you say your prayer silently to yourself while you're there,
right?
And, in the time that's allowed, and that for that. One of the things that I heard, so much when I watched some of this stuff today was people getting up there and they were saying stuff like, well, we took prayer out of schools and then that's why we have so many problems today. And that's why these kids are so unruly now. And because we took prayer out of schools, and that argument it goes nowhere with me. Just goes nowhere. We have so many social issues in this country, so many that just like, if you just like no, how about parents? How about single parent families? How about that? How about drug use? How about all these societal and economic pressures on people? But no, if we just put prayer back in the schools.
How about children being raised by tablets and televisions? And
yeah.
I mean, I have 2 kids and I've met a lot of their friends and I've met a lot of their friends' parents, and I can tell you where a lot of the problems lie. And it's right there. It's with parents not being interactive. It's with children being babysat by TVs. It's with, they has nothing to do with praying in school.
Yeah. That whole attitude is almost like a desperation. It's almost it's like you're being dropped into a pool and you're trying to find, you can't swim, and you're trying to find something to grab onto, and you grab onto that because it makes you feel good. It makes you feel secure. And but you're not looking at the wider issue.
Right. And that's one of my main problems with religion in general. I have my own religion. I have my own beliefs and my own whatever. And, I don't want to be one of those new agey, like, oh, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual people. But there's something to that, like I think religion for a lot of people, it gives them a shortcut to thinking, and it's an easy scapegoat for a lot of things. And, it should be used that way. We should all be trying to just figure out what's going on. And if that's what religion is, then I'm totally cool with it. But if it's something to fall back on so that you don't have to analyze a situation, or so you don't have to take any, accountability, or so you don't have to try to become a better person, then I'm not okay with it.
Cause man, I'd love it if it was that simple.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love it if I mean, I'm being a little facetious here, but if it was that simple, it'd be great, but it's not. And another issue about this was that I'm going to bet you, and I have no facts to corroborate this, but I'll bet you that was probably one of the most attended city council meetings in Phoenix history because of this issue. If they were debating the amount of homeless on the street, or the public housing, or Section 8 vouchers, or anything else like that, it would just be tumbleweeds rolling through.
Right.
So it's like, that's what gets people all up in arms, but maybe trying to improve the community, maybe that issue might be something that you want to attend the city council meeting for. I don't know. It's like there's so many other things that we can do. There's so many other avenues that we can take than just this one issue. It's like our state government here in Tennessee, they will bring up the religion stuff just to have something to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like they had this whole gay marriage thing where the Tennessee they were trying to pass it, and that the gay marriage wasn't going to be allowed in Tennessee, and it failed in our Tennessee legislature. And people were, our legislatures were getting on the floor and crying and sobbing and wailing and gnashing of teeth, and just like, my God, can we bring some industry to the state, people? Can we do something good for people? Can we help people out that maybe don't have health insurance in this state?
And that's what I'm saying. If we spend all of our time squabbling about things that you should be on a personal path trying to discover for yourself, then we're never going to focus on anything that's really going on.
Well, a lot of it's just demagoguery too.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it's just like you appeal to get votes because you want to make sure evolution's not being taught in schools. I mean, in some ways it's almost embarrassing. And this is coming from somebody that's a Christian. Okay. And another thing I want to point out before we stop here and go to the guest is that the city of Phoenix, they're in a city that's named after a confirmed occult symbol. Just would like to point that out for the record. All right, so let's go to Walter Bosley, and we're going to be talking about his new book, Origin. We'll be right back on Conspirinormal. We're back, guys. Conspirinormal. Even though for you it was just a instant in time, but for us it was at least 5-6 minutes.
It's magic.
And on the line we're turning for the third time officially. I guess you could maybe say fourth time since he was on our 100th episode. Mr. Walter Bosley. Welcome back, Walter.
Hey guys, thanks for having me back again. It's always good to be here.
Absolutely. It's always good to talk to you. I want to talk about your book, Origin, the 19th century origin of the breakaway civilization that Rob and I were talking a little bit about in the intro. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about some of the developments that have gone on in San Bernardino, where you're at with the shooting or the investigation, or what's kind of the latest that's gone on there, because that's fallen off the radar now. You don't really hear about it except for in Republican debates.
Well, because really nothing has happened. Anything that the Bureau's doing investigation-wise is going to be kept, classified.
Yeah.
So, if whatever's going on, we, the public, and of course there's been no other incidents. So, it was just that day, thank goodness. They were eliminated, and they certainly intended to cause a lot more mayhem, and they were stopped short, which is always a good thing. And, it's no great loss to the world that those two are no longer with us. So, yeah, things kind of got quiet. About the only thing is when it does pop up being mentioned in the news among the terrorist attacks going on around the world, it's kind of surreal almost to hear San Bernardino mentioned with Paris, France, in the same sentence.
Yeah, I mean, something similar happened in my hometown of Chattanooga, Tennessee, last summer when the guy killed the people in the Naval Center.
Yeah.
And you'll hear Chattanooga mentioned sometimes about that. I don't think it was quite as many people. But, there was this whole thing back when it happened that there was a third accomplice. Has anything transpired about that? Have there been any rumors that you might have heard or anything that people have said?
No, nothing at all. And as I said, the investigation is going to be, a tight lid, have a tight lid and be classified. So, if there is anything going on, we're not hearing about it publicly. So I assume that they're just doing their thing, and fortunately, nothing else has happened.
One thing I do want to ask you about is, you hear about the Sandy Hook stuff, and you'll hear about how people will say how Sandy Hook was just like was made up, or it was a false flag, or even just like a drill that went live kind of aspect to it. And they'll talk about whether like the lack, did anybody had any funerals or stuff like that. Have you seen like the announcements in the paper so that you can say, that you live there, that this event actually happened, there actually were bodies, people actually died, and they actually were buried?
Well, yeah, because I know someone personally who was close friends with one of the victims.
Okay.
The guy that lived up in the mountains, this really happened. These are real people who got killed and, left families behind. And as I've stated before, this is, but I haven't really talked about it a lot, and I haven't talked about it with you guys. It was not a false flag event. It was, the real deal. And whatever we could say was behind the people who did it, they really did it, and they weren't, government actors. Now, I still recall in the fog of all this and it wasn't very foggy. It was pretty clear. I remember a video that was shown during this stuff going on, showing more than 2 people running into the building dressed in black. And we never saw that video again. Haven't heard any more about that. That, of course, remains a very curious thing. And of course, I've said that I think that if there was a third or fourth, that it's very possible that they got that third and they turned him, and, however they did it, and that probably helped them with the eventual outcome and whatever they're doing now. It was not a false flag. And
right.
There were several points people brought up, and in a couple of places when I was asked to, I pointed out why those were in error, those points, as arguments for a false flag, and what they really meant as far as how things are really done. But of course, since I'm not part of the cabal or the conspiracy, I couldn't possibly know the plan. So I'm an idiot and don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, right? I just kind of wanted to clarify that, because you do hear that, as I'm sure you're aware, in conspiracy circles, especially about Sandy Hook, you'll hear about, well, where were the funerals? Where were the dead bodies? You hear that kind of stuff, and you see that kind of stuff on Facebook and conspiracy websites. So just for the record, that someone that knew someone that died, and you're there in that community, so you can vouch for that.
I would tell you the person I know's name. The victim was I think his name was Mike. Was the individual named Wetzel, last name of Wetzel, and I know someone who is a writer, okay, and a published author, and they were family friends with this guy and his family. So there's a verifier, right there, just one. So
right,
yeah,
right, yeah. It was so tragic what happened over there. It just such an awful thing. I think it's good to ask questions, but at the same time, we need to be sensitive. People need to be sensitive to, what occurred. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Let's not forget that these idiots exist. These idiots who want, and I'm sorry, anybody who is so insistent upon the whole world going to their church is a dangerous idiot, in my opinion. I don't care what religion you are. When you cross that line where you truly believe that the whole world needs to convert to your particular brand of faith, you have issues. And, you've crossed the line into, are you dangerous now? To what degree are you dangerous now? I don't want anyone to go out there and say, oh, Walter Bosley says anybody who believes the whole world should be their religion is a fanatical terrorist. No, that's not what I said. What I said is when you've crossed that line to strongly believing that everybody should convert to the point where you're willing to force that issue and do the thing that these Muslim idiots do, you're a problem. Because, sorry, but the whole world's not going to go to the same church. And, thank God, for those of us who don't think everybody should follow the same religion. There's some folks that, they have no need for religion. These two people, like the people that inspired them, no great loss when they get eliminated.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
I agree. Yeah, let's get on the book here. I think this is book. You're almost getting as prolific as Nick Redfern here. So
I'll tell you, I've been working hard these last, my gosh, what is it, 18 months?
Yeah.
In a year and a half, a little over a year and a half, I've done 4 nonfiction books and with 3 pulp novels thrown in there.
Wow. Let's talk about origin and this idea of the breakaway civilization. And first, I kind of like you to kind of define the term breakaway civilization, and then how you kind of got into studying this aspect?
Well, okay, what was the first part of your question again?
The term breakaway civilization, what that means, the people that may not be familiar with
that's
it.
recognized as being coined by Richard Dolan, who came up with, putting the concept into a frameable label. And naturally, I don't have that definition sitting right in front of me, but I believe it's in the book. But basically, it's when an organization with the resources that can exist independently of, the rest of us, meaning can exist independently of our commercial market structure, of our, an economy, independent of any of our known governmental structures, and can just be self-sufficient in itself in all those ways, and decides consciously to go that path, is essentially a breakaway civilization. And it's kind of there in the definition itself. They are their own culture or civilization, and they break away from the rest of us. And how I got into it, really, was through my Empire of the Wheel books with the At a Place discovery, I call it. And this background knowledge and familiarity with the whole mystery surrounding the Sonora Aero Club and the NIMSA, which I had learned about in, the works of Dennis Crenshaw and Mike Busby and Theo Pymans, and those guys. And in pursuit of the answers in Empire of the Wheel 2, regarding, what was going on in the general sense, how is it that At a Place could have been involved in all this, and the other things, the mystery with the Frank Rosasco that's talked about in more than one of my books, Origin included. It all began to kind of emerge that, well, heck, it looks like not only is it a hidden organization, but it's an organization that is big enough and self-sufficient enough and possessed of enough resources that it's looking like one of these breakaway civilizations. And it just kind of made a lot of sense to me when I looked at these things from that perspective. In fact, it made more sense than the popular notion of, like an ET, extraterrestrial origin for some of these things that were going on, or,
sure.
Military-industrial complex post-World War II. And that's kind of a distinction that, in effect, I don't think he did it consciously, but I think in effect Dolan's definition actually applies to that World War II, post-World War II military-industrial complex milieu.
Right.
Primarily, as I looked deeper, I saw that actually it started a lot earlier than that.
And it makes sense that it would start earlier than that if the technology was so much more advanced or just a little more advanced than our own. And kind of where I want to start is, this is interesting, and this is more applies to, I think, in Empire of the Wheel 3, the nameless ones. But you take that concept of the nameless ones and you kind of apply that to the breakaway civilization. In other words, that the breakaway civilization, in a way, was looking at older texts and applying some technology that might have come from an ancient civilization.
Right. That's the way it appears to me. As a result of my research, it just seemed to, the evidence that I present and argue, seems to support that idea to me, that these guys, started in the they emerged in the mid-19th century with the Sonora Aero Club and then later on. But it just made sense to me that what they were doing was taking advantage of knowledge of a lost technology.
And we kind of talked about this with when we had you on about Secret Missions 1 and 2, was this idea that you had places like the Royal Society in England, and that they basically, that's what they were doing, is they were secretly looking for this technology of a lost civilization. And we kind of talked about the Excalibur sword, a relationship to possibly Orme, and to this kind of thing. And you see that as kind of that's kind of a precursor to and we're going to talk about the two groups that you see as making the Breakaway civilization in a bit, but you see that as kind of like the precursor to those two groups in a way.
Yeah, any of these secret societies whose goal it was to retrieve this lost technology and kind of rebuild it, so to speak. These are the kinds of guys from which, in the German version of this, the Prussian version, we see a group like NIMSA emerge. Of course, NIMSA wasn't the only one, with those roots. But I think NIMSA was the first one to be so bold with developing the technology that it's suspected that they did. So you might say that NIMSA, it could be argued that the Prussian NIMSA of the 19th century, beat the other ones to it as far as, what they were able to pursue and develop. And, the other ones, worked at catching up. Certainly the American group, which I've kind of dubbed the 1903 by the end of Origin. Those who've read Origin will know what that means, what that refers to. They would have among their ranks, guys very much, of the same mind that were aware of these lost technologies, were interested in this kind of thing, and, pursued it from the American theater, you might say.
Well, let's talk about NIMSA first of all. And this is something we didn't really get into in the first couple of shows. First of all, and I think it has several layers of meaning, but what does NIMSA stand for? Or rather, what is it thought to have stood for, and what do you think it actually stands for? And who were they? How did they come about?
Well, and I'm looking for the page in the book where I spell it out because it's easier for me to remember it that way, or to recite it. But here's what we have. We have, in fact, do you guys have the book handy?
I have it on my Kindle on my phone. Yeah.
One of you find the page number for me where I spell out the definition of NIMSA. Let me know, and I'll go to it in mine and do that while I'm answering the first part of this question, if you don't mind. You have the multiple levels, as I say in the book. What you have is whoever stringing way back in history had been under the influence of the hidden ones, the nameless ones. Now, let's say that this was the original cabal that would become the Prussian NIMSA that I write about, okay? And this would be your group of guys, just like I described, what the Royal Society was doing in the Burton book. And just a group of guys, like-minded, looking to mine ancient history and ancient information for this lost technology of these forgotten civilizations. And they used the concept of the nameless one, the hidden identity, the mask, the NIMSA, as I go into in the book with Sechery's analysis. They use that concept to mask themselves, to remain unknown, shrouded and such, okay? And then when it came time for them to emerge just a little, these guys would have been the ones that were behind the Prussian men who established the NIMSA that's associated with the Sonora Aero Club and Delshout and the 1800s airship mysteries. Okay? So you've got that, and how far it goes back, who can say? I mean, they probably had been around for a long time, like some of the other, secret societies, rumored, to have been around a while. But it would have been that shadowy nameless group, just kind of an alliance, as it were, of like-minded guys, working in the dark, in secrecy, that would have created this Prussian Nimza, and being the kind of guys they are, they would have been behind the selection of an actual organizational name that would reflect this Nimza concept. So I argue, what I'm trying to argue here is that they were using the concept of the Nimza, the nameless one, and for all it was worth, literal or figurative, and they said, we want to come up with the name for our organization, and we want it to be a homonym. Is that the word, when it's two words that sound alike?
Right.
Yeah. And we want it to be that of the concept, the Nimza. But the acronym word, that we're coming up with must, of course, make logical sense regarding what this new Prussian outfit organization is going to be doing and what they're all about. So, yes, I argue that it was done on purpose, that they indeed decided upon a name where the organization would be called Nimza, pronounced such.
Okay, and, I actually did find it.
What page is it on?
Well, page is you have the Kindle version?
No, I got the printed version in front of me.
Okay.
I got it right here. I went right to it. It's on 132 of the printed version.
Yeah,
okay, I'll say it.
All right.
What it is, and this is the German, and pardon my pronunciation, German listeners, but Nationalistisch Jagdflugzeug Maschinen Zahlungsamt. Now,
I'm sure our friend Steven in Germany is laughing right now.
Exactly. And what I think this means is the Nationalist Pursuit Exploration Airship Program Office. I know that sounds like a mouthful.
Yeah.
But
it sounds better in German, actually.
What?
It sounds better in German, actually.
Yeah. And I go into what that means and why I believe in Empire of the Wheel 2. And, a little bit in Origin. So you can find that there in those books. We won't spend a lot of time going over that again.
Well, I think it's better than New York Motor Zephyr Association, which is what other people have thought it was, right?
Yeah, that's what they thought it was, but they were, unfortunately, they were wrong, because the source we have of NIMZA is Charles Delshau, okay? For NIMZA as the organization associated with these airships, okay? And Delshau says, clearly in no uncertain terms, it was a German-based organization. Period.
Let's talk about Delshau, because this is an interesting story all in of itself. Can you kind of go over where these strange drawings that Delshau did, and then just the equally strange way that this stuff was actually found?
Yes, it was found when I can't remember the family's name, but it was there in Texas, and I think somebody died. They were moving out of the family home, and these books, these albums of all these paintings and diary of Charles Delshau, who lived from 1830 or 1840 to 1923, ended up in the garbage at the dump, and a man who owned a junk shop, a man named Fred Washington, he found them. And he salvaged them from the trash. And another guy, Pete Navarro, in I think around 1971, he was at Washington's shop and saw the drawings. And I think there were even some college kids. I think that's what it was. Some college kids went to Washington and said they wanted some stuff to display in a history exhibit at their college. Regarding, the history of human flight. And Navarro might have, I think, seen that exhibit or saw it in the paper, but he went to Washington's shop to see these things, and he bought a few of them off of Fred Washington, and he started digging into the mystery of the Sonora Aero Club, and he made a little bit of headway He came to suspect that this was not just a lot of people like to write off Del Shao as an outsider artist.
Right.
It's kind of like when archaeologists don't understand the function of a mysterious ancient building, right? They say, "Oh, it's a religious temple." Anything they can't explain was religion. It's the same thing with, Del Shao. They can't really explain him. They don't want to go where the evidence points, so they just say, "Well, he was just an artist. It's all his imagination." Well, Navarro was finding that it wasn't just all his imagination. And here's an interesting thing. In the middle of Navarro, now this is in the mid-'70s, in the middle of Navarro digging this out, he finds out that the DiMeno Foundation bought several of the books of Del Shao's art. Now, the DiMeno Foundation, those of you familiar with the JFK conspiracy milieu, will recognize the DiMeno family among the players mentioned in the JFK assassination lore.
Okay.
Specifically, I think the Torbit document, the gemstone file.
Okay. Okay.
So you got to ask yourself, this is interesting. The Dallas DiMenos find Del Shao's art interesting enough to buy several of the books. And, Texas, when you look at the history of the airship mystery, Texas was one of the major places that this stuff was being seen. There was even an airship landing at Stephenville, which you remember, about 10, 15 years ago or so, I think.
Yeah, 2007. Yeah.
So, golly, what's going on in Texas? And here you have, the DiMeno Foundation in the middle of all this. So do they think he's just an outsider artist, or what do they know that, Pete Navarro and the rest of us don't know? And then, other researchers had looked into it. Dennis Crenshaw wrote his book, Secrets of Del Shao. Theo Pymans talked about Ninza and Del Shao in his book on Keeley, an excellent book, by the way. And then, of course, Michael Busby, who's done probably the best single book on the 1897 airship movie of all of them out there, a thorough investigation of this. And what you find is that there's a little bit more to it. Between when you look at the 1890s airship mystery, it begins to flesh out what Del Shao was talking about happening in the 1850s. And it was the 1890s airship mystery and the known historical advancement of, human-powered flight that kind of motivated Del Shao to start documenting his story in these private journals and albums. And my conclusion is the closer you look at it, the less you buy the outsider artist. It was all his imagination.
Because he was taking.
There's more to it.
Because it seems like he was making these drawings, and then he was probably drawing from things that he was actually seeing, and then he was actually describing what was in the drawings. Correct?
That's what I think.
Yeah.
I'm at present, I'm convinced that's what he was doing. That he was telling true stories.
So what was the Sonora Aero Club? And it was associated with NIMSA, so it would have been associated with this Prussian group. Yes. Well,
Del Shao even talks about a military guy coming to the group in 1858, I think, wanting them to build military versions of their flying machines. And the leaders of the group said, no, we're not going to do it, particularly the man who was the leader of the group. And Del Shao described this military man as that Prussian officer.
Okay.
So here you have Del Shao. He's already said that NIMSA was a German-based organization. He says a military guy who he describes as Prussian comes to the group, okay? And there you go. There's, yet more evidence that NIMSA was a German group. But, there's the connection there, according to Del Shao himself. This isn't something that, is conjecture. This is stuff he said.
So what kind of technology are they using? Because this is amazing stuff. I mean, you're talking about 1850s, and you're talking 60 years before the Wright brothers.
Yes. Well, I provide, as you know, in the book Origin, a chart that makes it easy because, you talk about this stuff and people say, oh my God, Bosley's saying that there was, those Bob Lazar S4 style flying saucers before the Civil War. No. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is these were what I call contraptions. These things were, somewhat fragile. They had wood, they had fabric, but of course metal also. And they had, probably something akin to, the Mercury Vortex engine, a very rudimentary form of the bell, what would become the Nazi bell, very rudimentary form, which meant, it was hazardous. And I equate the 1850s arrows of the Sonora Aero Club to be the equivalent of the Model T, okay, of these anti-gravity flying craft. So think of the Model T automobile and compare that to today's cars, and you'll see what I mean. Well, the 1850s Aero was the Model T of these airships, and then let's jump ahead. You've got the 1890s airships, which were much more sophisticated and larger than what Delshaw described in the 1850s. Well, that's like comparing a Model T to, say, a 1958 Buick Roadmaster, right?
Right.
The 1958 Buick Roadmaster was much more sophisticated than a Model T, okay? And just like what the 1890s airships were to the 1850s Sonora Aeros was the same thing that a 58 Buick Roadmaster was to the Model T. Now, let's zip ahead again into the 20th century to the World War II and after era. Okay, that flying saucer would be equivalent to a 1985 Porsche. So now you've got the mid 20th century, mid to late 20th century flying saucer, which is the equivalent of the 1985 Porsche, and you compare that to a Buick Roadmaster, okay? And then you compare that again to the Model T. So you've got the modern flying saucer to the 1890s mystery airship to the Aero, and that's equivalent of the 85 Porsche to the 58 Buick to the Model T. So
stages of development.
I probably said the same thing 4 different ways, but I want to make it easy for people to see what I'm talking about. And it shows a progression of technology that think about it. It was 40 years between the Sonora Aero Club and the 1890s airship mystery. And then it was another, 40 to 60 years or more, to the modern flying saucer, so to speak. So you see that there was time for this technology to progress.
Sure. And a bunch of time. You talk about 100 years.
Exactly.
In that time period. Let's talk about the American group, because you basically have in the book 2 groups that are competing with each other. You have this NIMSA, this German organization, and you have the American group. And I thought
I would say more that it's more accurate to say they had opposing objectives.
Right.
Rather than competing. There's a difference there.
Gotcha. But you kind of start off with the Civil War, and this and this stuff is documented. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he actually had pitched to the War Department some kind of flying craft.
Yeah, Dr. Solomon Andrews. He even had a patent for his flying Aeron, he called
it. And how did it work? What was it what was the technology that was there?
Well, he had, it was a 3-piece assembly that kind of looked like Zeppelin bodies, and with a command gondola underneath. But this thing was powered, and it moved unlike balloons. It had more maneuverability. It was much faster. And he flew this thing, demonstrated it. It was 80 feet long, demonstrated it in front of news reporters as well as members of the War Department.
Really? This is very like steampunk kind of stuff here. Yeah. It really is.
Much like Jules Verne.
Yeah, very much so. And so there's also, you mentioned in the book, associated with this American group, the gentleman named Keeley, and you mentioned him before, that he had this technology and that he was kind of thought of as kind of like a quack at the time and a fraud. But you do a good job of looking at that and saying that there might be a lot more to it. What was his technology that he was developing? And this is in the 1860s?
He was working with sound, okay, and rotational concepts, using sound and rotation, much like it's rumored that Edward Skienaumann used to build the coral castle, to be able to manipulate these massive coral blocks, just being the small guy he was. And
Right.
Keeley was able to do similar things. Basically, he was messing around with anti-gravity. It's interesting, you bring up the scandal and the fraud. Theo Pymans in his book, and others, of course, but Theo Pymans in his Keeley book does an excellent job in presenting that other witnesses to what Keeley did and people that worked with him were able to explain the detail that proved that the accusations of fraud were erroneous. Okay, but you don't hear that part. People, the minute they hear someone is accused of fraud, they stop there and they go, well, that must have been it. Well, me, I don't try to argue with those people. I'm not even writing for those people. I don't try to convince anybody who's opposed to, what I'm trying to convince them of. That's a waste of time.
Sure.
But Keeley was messing with anti-gravity in the late 19th century. And a lot of the things he was working with, found their way into the lore of what was going on with these mystery airships. And then you have in the 20th century, Victor Schauberger. Now, Keeley was working with, as I said before, he was working with concepts of rotation and spin. Well, this is what torsion, which is a concept that's been tied to the Nazi bell. Well, Victor Schauberger in the early 20th century, he was the German researcher and inventor who was working with the same concepts, the rotational dynamics, the torsion, and they both, Keeley worked with the rotation of water and the powers of water. Schauberger was doing the same thing. So you see, you have Keeley in the late 19th century, and then you have Schauberger who kind of picks up where Keeley left off with Keeley-type concepts, and, he brings it into the 20th century, and, you have him tied with, the early days of Nazi technology. And I didn't even, get into Schauberger in the Origin book because my purpose with this book was to bring everything up to the World War II milieu.
Right.
Because that's been covered elsewhere. But that's the progression is, anti-gravity working with these particular concepts. And Keeley was really ahead of his time with this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's talk a little bit about the 1897 airship mystery, because this is something that has always fascinated me. And, when I looked into it and when I was very much into the extraterrestrial hypothesis and everything, I thought, okay, these must have been aliens at the time, and people were interpreting the flying saucers as being, something that they could identify with in the late 19th century. But you look at it, and a lot of other researchers have looked at it and say that no, this was very much a down to earth invention. These things were actually flying. And you even go in the book to say that there's names that were even given of these pilots.
Sure. Yeah. You're talking about, Colonel Tillman,
right,
and, Amos Dolbear. These
right.
were guys who, were named in the Stephenville landing incident, in which several witnesses, had a conversation with Tillman, and he told them what they were doing and where they were flying, and told them a little bit about the craft. And the people that want to insist that this was all an ET thing, they very often leave those facts out entirely. They just stick with, people saw this amazing thing in the sky, and they don't tell the rest of the story, because the rest of the story does not support the ET hypothesis. And when you look at all the facts and all these details, you begin to see really quickly, and this includes the Aurora incident, you see that, sorry, this was not ET. But I find it fascinating that it was a human thing. That, when you think about what these guys were doing, what they were developing, to some measure of success, according to the accounts, to me, that's just as fascinating as any visitor from another planet.
Do you think the American government knew that this was going on, and were they in association with the government at this time? And it was just.
I think that by the 1890s, the decision to break away was it was consciously part of what was going on with this group, which I think, as I state in the book, was really America's first black project. Solomon Andrews Technology, according to the official story, Edwin Stanton said, "Nah, we're not interested." I don't think that's true. I think the U.S. government did buy the technology. I think they put together a group to develop it. I think that during the Reconstruction era, in the post-Civil War years, there weren't a lot of resources to go to this black project. So I think that's where private industrialists came in. And over the ensuing decades, they developed quietly and secretly on their own. And by the 1890s, they began to demonstrate where they were able to take this technology. And that was their first taste of, wow, look what we can do with this. So that by the early 1900s, sometime around the turn of that century, the decision was made to break away independently, as I state in the book, because the deal they would have made sure that the technology belonged to them, not the U.S. government. I would say that if my scenario is true, is right, and really happened, it probably schooled the U.S. government so that in the future, any kind of, military industrial projects, they made darn sure that, the U.S. government would be the beneficiary of the technology. But I think with this one, by the 1890s, with what they were able to do, I think that ultimately resulted in the breakaway of the American group.
Right. And let me ask you too, this will be one of the biggest questions that I think people ask when they're confronted with this kind of theory or this kind of hypothesis about what happened, is why not use this in warfare?
Yeah. That is a question I say in the book is, it's a stickler. Why did we not see this in the Civil War? Why did we not see this in the First World War?
It would have been a hell of an advantage. I mean, it really would have been.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing. You got to remember the mindset of the era. Let's go back to the early 20th century after World War I. Billy Mitchell. There was was it Billy Mitchell? I'm getting my guys mixed up.
Yeah, Billy Mitchell. Yeah, you're right.
Was court-martialed over, pushing the use of air power. Back then, the Navy was the primary branch, and air power was just for recon, kind of a second measure. And the early aviators, military aviators, were saying, no, I mean, this is really, we really need to be using this air power. Aircraft, needs to emerge in the forefront of, military application. And even after World War I, they were reluctant to see this and do this. So go back, 100 years before that, and, it was even less of, a consideration. It seemed like the Prussians were the only ones who saw, the benefit of this. So, which then leads to the question, okay, if these guys were developing these things, you would think this technology would have impressed, the governments at war with each other enough to say, hey, this will give us an advantage. Well, let's remember the Sonora guys were vehemently opposed to using this technology for military purposes, applications. Right. And by the time World War I happened, in my opinion, the American group that had this had already broken away. And I think they had, by that time, they didn't have an interest in having their technology embroiled in yet another, human war, right? Earth-based war.
You could really make the case with World War I that we really didn't understand the technology that we had in 1914. And it took so long through the course of that war to even come up with a technology that could effectively fight it. So, I can definitely see that for sure. They were still in 1916, 100 years ago, they were still sending at the Somme, they were still sending guys in formation into machine gun fire.
Exactly. It was, the style of warfare, was just not such that, when we know in history that, a prominent military officer after World War I was court-martialed over, just trying to get them to use airplanes, well, that tells you the mindset, okay? It was almost, I think, by some, I've read that it was distasteful to some. It was an ungentlemanly thing to drop bombs from balloons even, during the Civil War. And, it was just something that gentlemen didn't do, in the opinion of some people, even though, you got into World War I, and of course they were dropping, hand bombs and things like that, from the airplanes, but it just wasn't, it wasn't a main, tactic. And so that's what they were up against. But, by this time, the American group, in my opinion, would have broken away. And when I say broke away, some people would say, well, I can't believe that. They were Americans, blah, blah, blah. But they broke away, see? So they would have had no interest in getting involved in World War I. Now, however, then there's the German group. The way they were all ready to use this stuff in the 1800s for the military purposes. Well, the best explanation I have, because it is a sticking question, I admit that. It is a sticking question for my theory. Why didn't we see at least the Germans use this stuff? And I think it was because they knew that if they used this, the American group, whether they broke away or not, would have then at that time gotten involved and opposed them with equal strength.
Come after
them,
and
they decided that exposing the technology or being openly opposed was not something in their best interest. So therefore, that's why those two conflicts pretty much were void of this particular technology. And honestly, that's the best explanation I can give. Okay.
Well, let's talk about how the American group broke away. And this to me was where things got kind of bizarre. this concept of this, and the reason you call them the 1903 group. What's the reason you call them that?
Excuse me, just a second.
Sure. What do you think about all this, Rob?
Well, I'm
sorry. I had a dog that was demanding to go out.
I know how that is.
I'm glad we touched on the militarization of Excel. That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Repeat that last question again. Sorry.
The breakaway of the American group. To me, that's where kind of things get a little bizarre because you do call them the 1903 group. And why do you call them that?
Because there is a rumor, a really fun rumor.
Yeah.
And in 1903, somebody attempted to go off planet with an airship, specifically, according to the rumor in the lore, to Mars. I talk about that in the book only because it's out there. It's the elephant in the room on this. The rumor includes Tesla. And it's something that, you got to look at when you're talking about this business of these mystery airships, because it was so soon also after the 1890s airship mystery flat. And in the book, I say, hypothetically, let's say they tried this. I even present Oliver Heaviside's work in the book to show that, hey, somebody was working on technology that would have made this possible, even if it's a stretch, but, possible theoretically. So, what if this were true? And I present this to say, if anything, and it doesn't have to be true, but if anything would have inspired this American group to finally make the decision to break away, it would have been if they would have accomplished something as astounding as that. Now,
it's pretty astounding. In 1903,
as I go into it in the book, it would change what we think we know about Mars and all of that. It could have been just to the moon. It could have not happened at all. It could be that they just developed their technology to the point and said, hey, we're breaking away. We're our own thing. And that would still support my theory that during the World Wars, basically NIMSA, the German group, was kept in check by the American group saying, we're not going to get involved in this conflict, and neither will you, because if you do, we will, and this will all be exposed. And you know that if anybody can stand up against you and possibly defeat you, it's us. So I think what it was. Now, what I'm saying is that you had two groups that could have changed history and the outcome of the war that agreed to not actively participate. Some people would find that impossible to believe, but others who understand how, politics and things work and power and things work, it's perfectly logical. But we do see hints of them in the, certain technological developments that we do know about, and particularly in the post-World War II military-industrial complex era. I think after those conflicts, some of this technology we're talking about, began to emerge, including, at Roswell.
That's interesting. Do you think that Roswell could have been, what crashed there could have been something from one of these breakaway civilizations?
I'm sorry, there was a vehicle with a giant blowhorn outside.
Do you think Roswell could have been a craft from one of these breakaway civilizations?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, it was not extraterrestrial, in my opinion.
Okay.
Now, people familiar with my writing,
I agree with that.
Know that I have written about my father's claim that it was a hidden civilization here on Earth. And I think even that is more possible than Roswell being E.T. Yeah, I do. I think that Roswell was, the best argument presented so far for Roswell being a human event is Joseph Farrell's Roswell and the Reich. All the ET people out there are going, boo, hiss, hate that guy, hate Walter for bringing him up. But, 99% of those have never read the book. It is the best argument for what happened at Roswell that has been published so far, bar none. Okay? I'm
going to have to check that out. I'm going to have to get Dr. Farrell on the show too.
He gets so much venom for that, and yet the biggest critics of that book have never read it. Some of them I know, and I've asked, have you read the book? Well, no. Well, there you go.
Just because it goes against the paradigm that they accept.
Yeah, and it's so strongly against it, and it's so thoroughly researched and presented that they try to nitpick on stuff, and even their arguments when they nitpick are very weak. It's just ad hominem personal opinion type stuff.
Well, let's take.
It's an inconvenient book because here's what it does. It not only deflates the ET mythology, that just clings to that incident, but it opens up what I'm talking about. It really makes you look at what was humankind doing? What had they been doing for a while? And you asked what kind inspired me to write this book. It was a combination of what I had written about and researched relative to the Sonora Aero Club in Delshow in the 1890s mystery up to, earlier last year. And then, looking at Farrell's material in Roswell and the Reich, and I thought, you know what, there's a story there, and it needs to be told. And so that's what I set out to do, was to present, all this evidence that gets ignored by the ET crowd and suppressed. And, it needs to be presented because it does put a new light on all of this.
One of the things that fascinates me, and that's this is from Dr. Farrell's work, is the Kecksburg UFO crash. Mm-hmm. And that has been the way it is described, and the pictures that have been drawn of it by the witness accounts. I mean, it looks just like this Nazi bell thing, this electromagnetic device that the Nazis were working on in World War II, which has been proven.
Exactly.
And then also there's renderings of the same kind of little device in Delshell's work.
Exactly. There's the bell in Delshell's drawings. And I present that in the book.
How does NIMSA relate to the Nazis? Does NIMSA give rise to them? Are they an extension of NIMSA?
I'm sorry, I had someone at the door. Apologize.
It's okay. How is NIMSA related to the Nazis?
Okay, here's what I think about that. NIMSA and the Nazis.
So we're not the only ones that have dogs barking, Rob. Okay.
Okay. Sorry, I'm the only one here. And
you're good, Walter. we have Rob's dog bark during the show sometimes too. So just wanted to make him feel better. So what do you think, Rob? This you're all just kind of taking it in over here, and
well, like I said earlier, it's just fascinating. I've never heard any of this before. This is great.
Yeah. You kind of just like taking it in, and
I kind of want to go back and look at the history of aviation in general.
Yeah.
I apologize, guys. I had my window open and a neighbor came and they were calling me, and I thought it was the other. So I had to go tell them I'm on the phone on an interview right now. So
you're like, go away. So the relationship with the Nazis and NIMSA. This is interesting because you kind of paint this picture that NIMSA really gives rise to them.
Due to the obvious, you had the Prussian nationalists who wanted to have, to unify Germany in the 19th century, and they succeeded. We know that. And the guys who emerged, the bankers, the industrialists, and the mystics who emerged out of the 19th century Prussian unified German milieu, these are guys who you can trace that were instrumental in the early rise of the Nazis. So there's a major thread there, and I focus on that German thread for obvious reasons, because NIMSA being identified as a German organization by Delshell, and lo and behold, you have this Germanic thread, running into the Nazis from the 19th century. And these are the guys who would fit the description of guys most likely to be the guys who founded the Prussian NIMSA or were eventually, recruited by the Russian NIMSA and helped make their stuff happen. And that is one of the most fascinating aspects of the research that I did, because you can point to these guys. You can identify them. Karl Kellner, Friedrich Waniek, Walter Rathenau, who is, his father was the founder of AEG, and he was I think a CEO of AEG himself during the early Nazi era. And Halmer Schacht and guys like this, these are historical guys. They existed. And they also had in their background the qualifications and the interests and proclivities that would have tied them to a group like this mysterious NIMSA. It's one of the, I think, one of the strongest historical threads to argue the case.
What about the Tula Society?
The what?
The Tula Society?
The Thule Society?
Yeah.
Yeah. The Thule Society would have been one of the groups definitely influenced by the NIMSA, because as Theo Pymans, points out, and reveals in his Keeley book this Nimza airship milieu by the 1890s was very much involved with spiritualism and theosophy and these New Age occult circles. And these are the people also, by name, Madame Blavatsky was a huge fan of John Keeley, and Clara Bloomfield Moore and Olcott and Ledbetter and all these people, Annie Besant, all these people who were involved, and these are historical people, okay? Keeley was just a darling for their circles, but out of their circles from the late 19th century into the early 20th century, then you have guys who were involved with, the early German mystical milieu, okay, going into the 20th century. And, these are the guys that were also involved in the formation of the Thule Society and other organizations. Rudolf Steiner was in these circles. Carl Maria Williget, he was, an occult guru to Heinrich Himmler, okay? And Williget emerged from this early 20th century German mystic milieu that I'm talking about, and to become, the personal guru and advisor to Heinrich Himmler. Well, there you go. That right there is just one prominent, Nazi connection. Williget was made an officer of the SS, of course, as we know. And, and there's more, the more you look at it, the more you find, not the more you see. There's a difference. The more you look at it, the more you actually find that would tie or thread, these Nimza guys to the Nazis. And the basic Nazi philosophy served the Nimza well. So, they got their backing.
And Nimza too also had a lot of influence in South America, as you write. And you definitely see that
they were behind what became, these German colonies that were developed and eventually came the hideouts for the various Nazi fugitives. Yeah,
right. In Argentina and in Brazil and in these places, we had it's going to go on 2 years now. In a couple of months, Gerard Williams, who co-wrote a book called Grey Wolf about Hitler surviving. And fascinating stuff. I mean, just entirely plausible. And what the case that he makes is just, you can see it. You can actually see that happening. That it would have been entirely possible that he would have gotten off on a U-boat into Argentina and was just hiding out in these remote places.
Yeah, it's And the evidence, these little pieces of evidence that are revealing this, naturally they're emerging the more we get away from the World War II era.
And the Cold War.
The people that would have had a stake in keeping this secret, they're dying off.
And the Cold War, too. I think that's important as well. Because I think there's a lot of information and disinformation that we used against the Soviets, or that we kept from them.
Yeah, and our hand, through Operation Paperclip and other things, whatever the intention, there's the fingerprints in that. Naturally, throughout the years of the Cold War, they want to keep that secret. And the Cold War, just technically ended in the early 90s with the fall of the, with the Russian coup and the fall of the wall and all that stuff.
Right.
So, and then it takes a few years after that for, because people, they keep a tight lid on things. And let's not forget also, there's the public perception. People want to know that these guys were defeated. They want to know that they were all caught. They want to know that, Hitler died in the bunker. It's just, that's what they want to accept. They want to be done with that. And, when there's evidence that shows otherwise, it kind of unsettles people. It makes them a little nervous, and rightfully so.
Right, because you can look at a lot of the connections that were there in those communities and how the Nazis began to move a lot of their assets into those countries in the 1940s. I mean, some of them saw the writing on the wall, saw that, they weren't going to militarily win World War II, and they began to move those assets over there. And, whether Hitler was with them or not, to me, really doesn't matter, because a whole apparatus that later became kind of this, really just this multinational corporation in a way, that that's what it eventually morphed into.
Yeah. I mean, I talk about it in the book. Halmer Schacht was the economist banker who really applied this exporting Germany concept for the Nazis. I argue, of course, that it was done first by NIMSA. Yeah. But it was, there you go. There's a NIMSA concept, in my opinion, that influenced the Nazis directly. Schacht's idea was you gave aid money to foreign countries, smaller countries, so that they could develop their own agriculture and their own economy. And right after you give them the money, they conveniently buy your machinery and your technology and your personnel, with know-how to run these new industrial complexes in your country. And there you go. You've got Germany transplanted via the economy, via the market, into, these other countries. Yeah. Well, what Germany could do then was, against the Versailles Treaty, which people knew they were doing this, they could build and develop and pursue things that, after World War I now we're talking, they weren't allowed to do according to the treaty, munitions and military technology. And one of the things they did was they expanded upon the German colonies, so to speak, in South America, for example.
Places like Colonia Dignidad.
I think Schacht, when he applied this to the Nazi system, I think he was just taking his lead from what, the NIMSA-backed Prussians, early unified Germany under the Kaiser, had been doing already in South America.
They laid the groundwork for it.
They pretty much tested it and made it work, and I think Schacht just expanded upon their idea.
One of the theses in the book, and this is kind of an aside, but I found this fascinating. The idea that Hitler survived and in Argentina. Well, in that book, Grey Wolf, they talk about, and I've seen actually the movie that the documentary that they made about it, but, they talk about Martin Bormann surviving as well. And what happens to Hitler eventually, as he's down there, is he just gets sidelined by Bormann. He just becomes this figurehead, and Bormann is the real person in control, and Bormann just who creates this corporation that no longer has the interest to say that we're going to conquer the world. Oh, we're going to conquer the world, but we're going to do it economically. We're going to do it, clandestinely.
We're going to do it from within.
We're going to do it from within.
Yeah, we're not going to do an external conquest. We're just going to, infiltrate.
Yeah.
And take over from within.
And Hitler just dies forgotten about, essentially.
Well, I not forgotten about. Maybe, the illusion that, the story that he killed himself, he's hidden, but I think he still remained very much, a revered figurehead, kind of like, what Abraham Lincoln as a president is to most Americans, or George Washington, I should say. That's what Hitler was to those guys. But you're right. He was effectively not the manager anymore. He was like the ex, presidents, treated with respect and revered, but not really the guy running the show.
Sidelined.
On. Yeah, exactly. But I think he was certainly not forgotten by those guys, but, he was hidden from the world for obvious reasons. But, we could probably argue that, certain world leaders knew the truth.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say Stalin always suspected it.
Yeah, because I think, the Russians made up that story. I think that story of the suicide in the bunker, and a lot of people do. It's not original with me, but I accept that theory that, that was bullshit, with the Russians. And the Americans accepting it and proliferating it, we had our own agenda for doing that too.
Sure. And some of it too had to do with the fact that we had, that there were certain people in our government and, a lot of blue bloods and industrialists that had such a ties to the Nazis before World War II.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's all that stuff with Prescott Bush.
Alan Dulles would be a good example of that. Yep.
And, so there you go. That's the thing. You look at history and you see the facts, the documented facts and truths, and you see where stuff was kind of pushed to the margin or suppressed a little bit or glossed over for, a variety of reasons. And it might not be the fun, to some people's minds, it might not be the fun theory, the gray aliens or the little aliens from Close Encounters coming down from a wonderful paradise, and they're so morally superior, and they're going to come down and they'll take the lucky few, the select, into La La Land, and all is well. This is a fairy tale. And
Heaven's Gate style stuff here.
What's that?
The Heaven's Gate cult stuff.
Yeah, almost. It's almost as scary, but it's just unfortunately for people who really cling to that, the facts do not bear out. The facts way support more the human origin and the human explanation, Earth-based human explanation for Roswell and these things.
But you don't.
I'm not saying ETs don't exist.
Right.
I'm
For
not
the
saying
record.
they haven't, but I'm saying in the case of Roswell, I do not think that was ET. Aurora was not ET. And the real story here that I think is being hidden, more so than the existence of ET, or just as much, is this human story, hidden human story behind the last 150 years.
Yeah. And to me, it's an even more amazing story than what's been given to us.
Equally amazing. Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. But, there's a lot of people that just don't want to hear that, because the ET hypothesis, adherence to it, has become like a religion. It's, people, they've got emotions attached to it. In some cases, people's livelihoods are attached to it,
I read Olaf Phillips' book. I had him on the show a couple of years ago as well. And, I know that you know Olaf too. And, and one of the things I found fascinating in his book about the secret space program was that, these different craft that were seen and these witnesses talking about these inscriptions that were seen on the side of them. And then Olaf goes back and looks at these inscriptions and says, hey, this kind of looks like this fascist symbol from the 1930s. And It's like, then you have the valiant Thor and everybody talking about the blonde hair, blue eyed Nordics and the Venusians, and interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why you saw the rise of the pushing of the little gray alien, the big-headed alien with the black eyes. I think that's why that concept started to be pushed heavily in the 80s. That, oh no, this is the alien, and you quit hearing about those Nordic human aliens, so-called aliens, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's because the people wanting to hide the human source of this stuff, the human breakaway source of this stuff, they decided that the ET meme, the ET hypothesis, would be pushed, and they pushed it well. To the point where it's like a religion.
When you look at the Travis Walton case, that's a perfect case, because if you look at the movie Fire in the Sky that was made about him, that was changed from, you have these little yellow creatures that are putting sheets of skin over him and he's screaming and stuff. But in the actual story, Travis Walton encountered one little being, but everybody else that he encountered were humans.
Mm-hmm. There you go. They've even changed that's evidence right there of changing the classic cases that are documented to serve the non-human ET hypothesis that they wanted everybody to buy off on.
And Travis Walton himself says, I did not see those little creatures. I saw people, Yeah,
let's not forget that, that Dr. Carol Rosen says that, Werner von Braun told her that this ET thing would be part of, what the people that want to run the world, control the world, that it would be part of their strategy to, mislead the public at large, the ET thing. And again, I'm not saying there aren't ETs out there. Of course I think they're out there. Personally, I think the dirty secret is that there's human beings exactly like us on other worlds. And the argument I get against that is, it's impossible for any humans exactly like us to have developed on any other world. Really? Okay, here's the thing.
They've never seen Battlestar Galactica, the new version.
Yeah, exactly. When science can show me that they've sent people to every known world in the universe and have not found a single human like us anywhere else, then I'll say you can say that. But until we've traveled to every corner, every celestial body in this universe and found not a single human just like us, you cannot say that. So I say one of the secrets is that they're out there and there's a lot more of them than, they'd like us to know. That's not saying that the little grays don't exist. That's not saying that, other alien life doesn't exist. I'm just saying that, that theme is being used, to manipulate. And they've done a great job because, the people that cling to that, their feathers get ruffled when you talk about what we're talking about here tonight.
I want to ask you, let's get your feathers ruffled a little bit. I sit down to watch this movie, a documentary called Mirage Men on Netflix. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great documentary about disinformation, about how that's been used against the UFO community. And, but I'm watching it and then all of a sudden you come up on the screen and I'm like, oh God, it's Walter Bosley. What do you think about that documentary?
Mixed feelings. I was asked to be part of it. I'm friends with Greg Bishop, and he was acquainted with those guys, Pilkington and John Lundgren, I think is his name, while they were doing this, and he helped work on other parts of the documentary, and he had told them about me, or I think they'd heard me on his show, and so they asked me to be part of it, and I agreed. And I think that it's, I answered their questions honestly, and stand by what I said. Whatever spin goes on that, I don't always agree with. I think it was skewed because when you read the book, here's the interesting thing. They're condemning an organization, Air Force OSI, okay, which we can agree is much smaller than the Central Intelligence Agency, smaller budget, smaller size, smaller amount of resources. They're condemning, they pretty much, the DOD, particularly the U.S. Air Force, and especially the Air Force OSI. They're the guys behind all this disinformation. It's terrible. Those dirty, rotten guys. But what's interesting is they have high praise for, I think it's Dr. Kit Green, who's a CIA guy.
Yeah.
For here, people would, they just laugh their asses off when you hear about guys who, the U.S. government, the military and the Air Force and the OSI, but boy, this CIA guy, he's a great guy and, he's all well and good. Well, my view of that was that, guys, why weren't you equally suspicious of, the agency if you're going to be painting, every OSI agent with the same brush? That's my only point of contention is, I wondered, okay, what's behind this? Why are these guys making this film? Why are they so okay with the CIA guy? When a lot of researchers, when they're talking disinfo and they're talking conspiracy, government conspiracy, they would include CIA. They would say CIA was probably behind whatever OSI was doing disinfo-wise. So I find that to be suspicious, and I think the viewer ought to question, particularly, they need to read the book. But it was, it was a well done documentary.
Yeah.
I clearly said the things I say in it, and I stand by it. Like I said, I don't agree with some of the spin that, some viewers have put on it. But, in the documentary, they presented what I said, fairly. And, in the doc, they didn't put a particular spin on, what I said. I think that, a viewer comes away with their own conclusions. But it's well done. My understanding is that I think it won a couple of awards at festivals, and I think they're finally getting some distribution for it or something.
Well,
but I get asked about it a lot. I've never met Richard Doty, for the record. I usually don't go on record with opinions, or even go too far in private conversations with opinions on the Doty situation, because I'll tell you right now, in Richard Doty's defense, I didn't work with him. I didn't work on his operations. I haven't read his case files. And until people read the case file, none of us know. If you haven't read that case file, you don't know the details as to what happened with any of that stuff, particularly where Benowitz was concerned and stuff. Because I guarantee you the case file has stuff that, the makers of Mirage Men and every other person who's documented that case or written about it has no clue.
Well, it was interesting. It was interesting in one scene, and I forgot the context of this, but they were talking to somebody, and they were asking him what the documentary was about, and the guy says, well, it's about guys, Air Force guys like Richard Doty and Walter Bosley misleading people, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking to myself, Walter's not associated with this guy. I mean, Doty's one thing, but you had nothing to do with any of that.
I was a special agent for the Air Force OSI. You damn right. Proud of it. Did a great job. And my bosses, I think, thought I did too. And
but you weren't involved with him. I mean, you weren't in that capacity.
I didn't become an OSI agent until 1994. Okay.
Yeah.
All this stuff that happened, like particularly with Doty now, that happened in the 80s.
Right.
I was in college in the 80s and working for the FBI in the late 80s and early 90s. I didn't go into the Air Force until I reported for officer school in August of 93. Was commissioned on 19 November 93, and right after New Year's went to the OSI Academy and started duty as an OSI agent in April of 1994. And I was busy hunting spies and running counter-espionage operations out of Wright Pat with the deployment to Saudi, hunting down bin Laden and terrorists for 6 months in the mix there. And
that's a whole show we could do on that, probably.
That's what I was doing. Now, in that, what makes me get talked to and be asked questions about is when you're a counterintelligence agent in OSI, you do what's called program protection work. Okay. And that is some of your duties, your investigative and operational activities are to protect classified Air Force resources. And my comment that, people hear me say is that if people believing that an advanced Air Force aircraft is a spaceship from another world, if that belief, that idea protects that technology, right, from being revealed to the enemy or whatever, I'm all for letting people believe that, you know, and I don't really care who's going to whine and cry about that. If people saw stuff out at Area 51 and they were convinced it was from another world and the Air Force was just letting them think, or encouraging the idea that it was someone from another world in order to protect that technology, I'm all for that. I would, if I were reactivated and they said that's going to be your job full time, you damn right I'd do it.
But Greg
now,
Bishop,
would I go so
even
far as destroy people's lives and hell no. And I don't think Doty did either. If you read closely, particularly if you read Greg Bishop's book, Project Beta, you look closely, I think you'll see that the people who were likely doing the nefarious stuff, that was a different organization, a different alphabet agency.
Which one?
Okay? Probably NSA.
Yeah, probably.
And that's not OSI. So I think people, as far as like particularly the Benowitz thing and against Doty, they've been looking in the wrong place.
Are you familiar with Rendlesham Forest case and Larry Warren left at Eastgate? Are you familiar with that?
Repeat that
stuff. Larry Warren, the left at Eastgate, the Rendlesham Forest.
The Rendlesham Forest thing, a little bit, just what I've heard, like what everybody else has heard, interviews and things.
Yeah. Larry Warren was a guy that was a witness there. He's like 19 years old at the time. And his claim is that he was taken down to a lower level of that base, an underground level of that base. And what they think ultimately happened was, to make a long story short, was that they dosed these guys up with something to try to make them forget or to try to just instill something into their minds. And there was a lot of Peter Robbins who wrote the book with him. We've had Peter on the show. He actually had a lot of encounters with the NSA when he was helping Larry write that book. So I think there's something to that.
Yeah, and the idea that these guys were doped up and messed with, I would agree. I think it's probably very possible that was the case. But, I'm not going to call them liars. I think whatever their experience was is real, to them. And, I'm not even going to say to them. I think it was a real experience. I just think that it's very possible, because we know the technology exists, it's very possible that their what they came away with, what they perceived it to be, what they understand it to be, was very much a manipulation of their, of their psychological memory of it, deep memory.
Yeah. Well, Walter, it's been excellent to have you back on. Real quick, where can everybody get the books, and also what's next for you? I hear that there's a rumored next Secret Missions book coming.
There is. There will be Secret Missions 3 coming out later this year. There will also be an interesting follow-up to my Latitude 33 book that I'm real excited about. I'm in the research phase. The research phase for Secret Missions 3 began last year, but there's still quite a bit more to go. I really want that one to be something special. And, this other book, both these books will be out, later this year. You can get my books on Kindle at Amazon.com. I have an author page there. You can find all my books there. And also the printed version, if you prefer printed, print on demand at lulu.com, LULU.com. And, I appreciate being on. It's always good to talk with you guys. And
yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad that people are interested in this stuff I do.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It really is. It gives you an alternate version of what you think you know.
Right. That's how I was telling Adam, we see a lot of different angles on this show, and this is something that I've never heard, and it's incredibly fascinating to me.
Oh, well, thank you. That's one of the things that draws me to research these things. When I write these books, any of my books, I don't set out to say, okay, this topic is popular, I'll write a book on this topic because it's popular. Honestly, my Boy Scouts honor, I don't do that. I honestly, sincerely write about things that, a past book, book's research, has led me or things I stumble upon. And this is, I've been pulling threads since 2007, and my books are where those threads have, legitimately led me.
Yeah.
And, so I really appreciate when people find them interesting.
All started at Disneyland.
Yep. And that was the first one.
It's funny. I was listening to one of our earlier shows with Adam Go-Rightly, and he was talking about Disneyland stuff. And, he asked on the show, actually, have you ever had Walter Bosley on? And I'm like, no. So that was like show 18 or something. And now here you are, your third episode with us. So
Well,
you've joined you've joined the 3 episode club now, sir.
Oh, great! Is there like a private lounge like Steve Martin and Alec Baldwin have for being Saturday Night Live hosts?
Yeah.
It's not that nice.
We'd have to come up with that sometime.
Have a special bar, and we wear silk jackets.
Or a kimono like Rob has on right now. So, all right, Walter, stay on the line with us. We're going to close out this segment, guys. We'll be back to close. We'll be right back to close the show on Conspirinormal. And we're bringing it back in on Conspirinormal.
Yeah.
We need to have I was thinking what we should do is we need to do make fun of the actual radio and have your wacky morning guys stuff with stupid sound effects. I think that would be really neat. What do you think?
Just for the intro.
Yeah.
Just to lead us back in.
Or just when Luke's not here, you can have some stupid sound effects. Just prank call people on the road and piss them off. I don't know.
Yeah. I was working on my, my cheesy radio DJ voice the other day, but it's so bad I'm not even going to try.
And this is
Rob from the morning show.
Wacky morning guys. All right. Well, that was Walter Bosley talking about his book Origin. That was fascinating. We got into a lot there. I think my brain is a little tired and fried.
Yeah, I've got so many things to look into now. It's rare that a guest comes across it. It's a topic that I've never even heard of. A lot of times I don't know a lot of details about it, or a lot of history or names or things associated with it. But this one is just completely foreign to me.
I know. And a lot of it was foreign to me too. When I first started, a lot of this he first started looking into was in the Empire of the Will series, like he mentioned, and especially from Empire of the Will Part 2, because it all came to him from in the first book where he's talking about this guy that was taken into custody, that was a suspect in this murder that took place in San Bernardino in 1915. And you guys can listen to that. That was, I think the first time we had Walter on was back in April of last year. So you guys can listen to that show when we talked about Empire of the Will series, but it was just this idea that this guy was, supposedly taken back was bailed out by friends from Sonora. And then this whole led Walter into this whole thing about the Sonora Aero Club and Charles Delshow and who that was. And, that kind of took on a whole life of its own in study that was kind of separate from the Empire of the Will stuff, in my opinion. The Delshow stuff is fascinating. Just the whole story there of just being found in somebody's house and the weird pictures and trying to interpret what they're seeing. And, all this stuff is real. All this stuff exists. It's just like Walter said, it's been just declared to be just this weird art, but that's interesting that these rich people in Texas have bought this stuff and kind of hidden it away a little bit.
Yeah.
That's actually in a book. I think there's a book that was published that you could actually buy that shows, Delshow's quote unquote artwork.
That kind of adds credibility to the whole thing. Just the fact that anyone would scoop that up and then hoard it.
Right. And yeah, I mean, that just, the story in and of itself is just crazy. And it's as time goes on, we begin to see more and more of this stuff kind of come out. And there's a lot of people out there that are just kind of uncovering the mystery of what happened. And to me, it's pretty fascinating. It's fascinating stuff. Even if there is no breakaway civilization, even if it was just an invention that somebody did and they just hid it away because they didn't want the government to use it, or they wanted to use it for themselves. I mean, even then, it's still, what a fascinating story that somebody would actually be flying something like that at the end of the 19th century.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
and that's why I want to go. Maybe though, like what kind of aside from balloons, did they have? I mean, when did Zeppelins and stuff like that sort of appear?
I want to say Zeppelins came not too long after that. I want to say that it was probably 1899 or not even 1900 that the first Zeppelins were flown. Of course, no actual airplanes. In other words, heavier than air airplane craft until the Wright brothers in 1903. Right. But apparently the airships were not considered like Zeppelins. That they weren't balloons, that they ran on some other kind of technology. That's also fascinating.
Right. Like the Nazi Bell and
this whole idea. Now, as far as I know about the Nazi Bell, it was like some kind of electromagnetic device.
Well, that's what fascinates me too. Is it involves. I mean, just the Germans in general have been at the forefront of a lot of engineering. Yeah, especially involving rocketry or astronautics and even acoustics, which comes into play a lot of times when you talk about anti-gravity stuff, strangely enough. Right. Another interesting connection with all this has been these occult societies with these people that are proponents of this kind of high technology. I find that utterly fascinating as well. And what it makes me think of a little bit of Jack Parsons, and he was a rocket engineer, but he was also a serious occultist. So that's interesting to me as well. Well, it's cold, and I think that we've got had a long enough show. Guys, we will be back in about a week and a half. Probably less than a week and a half when this is actually posted. But we are going to have on Ron Felber, who is and had this confirmed just a few days ago. Yeah, we're excited about this one.
He is the author of a book called The Mojave Incident. And getting started in reading the book, and apparently it is one of the most frightening accounts of alien abduction that has ever been described. And apparently it's a true story. So I'm real happy to have him on the show coming up. And got a few cool surprises coming up in February, at the end of February and in March. One guest that scheduled today that I am extremely excited about, but we'll save that for later. And we'll let Luke take us out. Oh, yeah.
That's right. Luke. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Well, darn. All right, guys. Hope everybody has a good evening, or wherever you are, in your car, morning, day, night, whatever. And don't let the flat earthers get you. We'll see you later on Conspirinormal.